Now at a second time. I call the member for Baulkham Hills.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. Mr Assistant Speaker, I just rise to make a modest contribution to the Passenger Transport Bill 2014. Many of the points that have been made in this chamber have indeed been repeated, and so at the risk of sounding laborious, I just really wanted to first of all acknowledge my support to the Minister for this bill, but also just highlight a couple of brief points.
Order. I would just draw the attention of people in the gallery that they are not able to put their hands on the rail or over the rail, and I would suggest to the Parliamentary Secretary he should know better. Member for Baulkham Hills.
Mr Assistant Speaker, it's been well documented here in this place during this debate that the current New South Wales passenger transport laws are very much dated, and in fact, in reading some of the notes, auxiliary points to this particular bill, it indeed replaces the Passenger Transport Act of 1990, and members of our side, the government, would probably recall that the Minister who initiated the Passenger Transport Act 1990 was the Honourable Bruce Baird, the former Minister for Transport under the Greiner government. So it's quite appropriate that under the Baird government in 2014 we review this particular piece of legislation. Of course, the bill is to ensure a legislative framework for providing passenger transport services, but more importantly, it gives commitment and proves to the people of New South Wales that this government has a vision for customer-focused transport services in New South Wales, and indeed it does that by modernising the current Passenger Transport Act of 1990 and promotes a much more flexible approach to the needs and changes in the industry. And of course, as I mentioned in my remarks, it also addresses some of the technological developments that have occurred in the 24 years since the previous Act was gazetted. Mr Assistant Speaker, it was in 2012 that the Minister decided to commence the first of her comprehensive reviews on the legislation, and this bill is pretty much an outcome which involved much consultation with the industry and various stakeholders. But as the member for Cronulla mentioned, there are a number of key changes, but I'd just like to concentrate on one or two. I think probably the most interesting for consumers of taxis in this state is the fact that this bill will now limit surcharges on taxi fares from 10% to 5%. As the Parliamentary Secretary for Roads and Transport has reminded me again this afternoon, this surcharge is something that has been a matter of great concern to the industry. In many respects it was considered a revenue stream for drivers, and whether or not that was warranted, that's probably a debate for another time. But this particular Act does allow us to limit those surcharges, something that I think will highlight the fact something that I think will be well appreciated by consumers. It also modernises booking services by highlighting the fact that in 2014 we actually have things like apps and smartphones, and it allows those new technological advancements to be brought into the regulatory framework. So, Mr Acting Speaker, there is a debate, Mr Assistant Speaker, excuse me, there is a debate, of course, over the use of apps and booking services. That's probably not something that we will debate today, but it's something that is certainly acknowledged by the government in introducing this bill to the House. Mr Acting Speaker, I mentioned consultation, and credit has to be given to the Minister for Transport, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, for her wide-ranging consultative approach to not only this bill but all the legislation. And if I can just divert to my own constituency in that regard, and I do know that the Minister does have a commitment to consultation, because in her much lauded $8 billion construction of the North West Rail in my electorate, I cannot think of an occasion when a matter has not been consulted with my community. And this is again reflected in the implementation of this bill and in inviting consultation from stakeholders. The Minister received some 50 submissions which were received in response to the discussion paper that was introduced. Mr Acting Speaker, on the matter of applications, the bill will allow the safe use of new app technologies so customers will have safer options in booking taxis, and I think that is an important part of government's progressive approach to technology and IT. But more importantly, as the Member for Cronulla highlighted, that this bill introduced the concept of close associates. There has been some bad press in the taxi industry over the years, and indeed there's been bad press in relation to much of the transport portfolio over the years. But this bill introduces the concept of close associates, and it gives roads and maritime services the power to refuse an application for operator accreditation or cancel an existing accreditation where a close associate of the applicant previously held operator accreditation has been cancelled because they were no longer a fit and proper person. So you could have a case study, Mr Assistant Speaker. Let's just say there was an undesirable person in this industry. Let's just call him Eddie. Let's say Eddie had some taxis, and he was determined as an unfit, no longer a fit and proper person to be in this space. So let's just say that Eddie decided that because he'd been given that label, he decided to hand over his accreditation to a bloke named Joe. So Eddie is no longer a fit and proper person. He decides he wants to give his accreditation to Joe.
Now we know exactly.
But now, under this legislation, neither Eddie nor Joe will be considered a fit and proper person, and therefore Eddie and Joe, well, indeed, the member for Campbelltown highlights the fact that Ian may be the beneficiary of this particular scam, but I understand and am reliably informed by the Parliamentary Secretary that in the case where Eddie, Joe and Ian were all in cahoots, well then this legislation would no longer allow the accreditation to be transferred between those three former Labor MPs. Mr Acting Speaker, this is designed to prevent an operator whose own accreditation has been cancelled from continuing to run their business using a front person. So, under this legislation, we no longer allow the use of front person. So, the Parliamentary Secretary highlights the use of the example of tattoo parlours, and I suppose in many respects this does reflect the government's approach to tattoo parlours as well. Mr Acting Speaker, I digress, so let's get back to the bill. The bill strengthens the existing regulatory frameworks also for air transport services and the safety and competency regimes for the delivery of public passenger services generally, and for that I think the House would be appreciative. Mr Acting Speaker, for the first time, the bill provides for the use of innovative new smartphone taxi booking apps to improve customer choice and convenience. And as mentioned in my opening remarks, it's been 24 years since the bill was reviewed. In that time, we've had a number of developments in IT, and e-commerce has become something that futurists aren't talking about. It's becoming a reality, and this bill provides innovative new smartphone taxi booking apps to improve customer choice and convenience, and I'm very grateful for the Minister for allowing to include that into this legislation. Mr Assistant Speaker, it is important to note that there is no requirement for an operator to be part of a booking service, nor are there limitations on the number of booking services to which an operator may belong, and I think that is important. In conclusion, Mr Acting Speaker, and if you probably note my theme of my speech has been on IT, it's important to note that through IT and regulation, other new services are emerging in the market, and the government recognises that, such as ride-sharing services, and that's something that has been considered. So Transport New South Wales is currently considering how these services could be addressed under this legislation. Mr Acting Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
Question.